Brief History of USA and Civil War and Reconstruction, 1848 to 1877.
Sectional debates over Western lands threatened to dissolve the Union, prompting Senator Henry Clay to propose a series of compromises. Under the Compromise of 1850, California entered as a free state, while other territories were open to popular sovereignty. The compromise adjusted Texas borders and banned the slave trade in Washington, D.C., but introduced a severe fugitive slave law. Designed to pacify the South, the new Fugitive Slave Act targeted northern state laws that protected runaway slaves. Accused runaways were denied jury trials or self-defense, and federal commissioners were paid double for returning them to claimants. Northerners were legally compelled to assist in capturing fugitives under threat of a $1,000 fine and jail time. The lack of trial requirements facilitated the kidnapping of free Northern blacks, including New Yorker Solomon Northup in 1841. Outraged Northern states passed personal liberty laws that blocked federal enforcement and guaranteed trial rights to the accused. Northern resistance relied on Prigg v. Pennsylvania, 1842, which ruled that state officers could not be forced to enforce federal slave laws. In direct reaction to the Fugitive Slave Act, Harriet Beecher Stowe penned Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, transforming Northern public opinion. Eliza's dramatic flight across the icy Ohio River became a powerful symbol of the universal human desire for freedom. The Whig Party's crushing defeat in the presidential election of 1852 fractured the traditional political system, leaving a dangerous vacuum. Senator Stephen Douglas proposed organizing Kansas and Nebraska under popular sovereignty to facilitate a transcontinental railroad ending in Chicago. The Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the Missouri Compromise's ban on slavery north of the 36-degree 30-minute parallel, provoking Northern fury. The Kansas-Nebraska Act destroyed the National Whig Party and divided Democrats along strict geographic lines. Out of the ruins of the Whig Party emerged the Republican Party, founded specifically to oppose the westward expansion of slavery. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed to Kansas, with Northern groups sending Sharps rifles in crates labeled Bibles. Heavily armed Missourians crossed the border to vote illegally, engineering a fraudulent pro-slavery victory in the territorial election. The fraudulent Lecompton legislature enacted a severe slave code that made possession of anti-slavery literature a capital offense. Free staters established a rival government under the Topeka Constitution, leaving Kansas with two competing capitals. The killing of a free state settler sparked the brief Wakarusa War, pushing the territory to the brink of open conflict. Pro-slavery forces ransacked Lawrence in May 1856, burning buildings and destroying anti-slavery presses, igniting a guerrilla war. In retaliation, radical abolitionist John Brown led the brutal Pottawatomie Creek Massacre, killing 5 pro-slavery settlers. Representative Preston Brooks beat Senator Charles Sumner unconscious over Sumner's anti-slavery speech, bringing violence to the Capitol. Held in wrongful enslavement, Dred Scott filed a routine freedom suit in Missouri, unaware it would become a national crisis. Scott's suit relied on his residency in Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory, where federal laws prohibited slavery. Under Missouri's long-standing once free, always free precedent, Scott expected to win his liberty. Financed by Taylor Blow and represented by Roswell Field, Scott sued in federal court after losing in the state Supreme Court. Scott's lawyers argued that his residency on free soil emancipated him, while his owner, John Sanford, challenged federal bans on slavery. On March 6, 1857, Chief Justice Roger Taney delivered the landmark majority opinion denying Scott his freedom. Taney ruled that Black Americans, enslaved or free, were not citizens and had no right to sue in federal court. The court ruled the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, declaring that Congress had no power to ban slavery in the territories. Taney asserted that slaves were property protected by the Fifth Amendment, making territorial bans on slavery illegal. The decision provoked immense Northern outrage, uniting moderate Free Soilers against a perceived Southern judicial conspiracy. Justices Curtis and McLean dissented, pointing out that free blacks voted in several states at the time of the Constitution's ratification. Scott was ultimately purchased and freed by Taylor Blow in May 1857, working in St. Louis until his death in 1858. During the 1858 Illinois Senate race, Douglas issued his Freeport Doctrine, arguing settlers could still exclude slavery through local police power. Douglas's doctrine alienated Southern Democrats, led by Jefferson Davis, who demanded absolute federal protection for slavery in all territories. On October 16, 1859, John Brown raided Harper's Ferry, hoping to seize weapons and spark a slave rebellion. The raid failed. U.S. Marines under Robert E. Lee captured Brown, who was subsequently tried and sentenced to hang. Brown's execution martyred him in the North, while confirming Southern fears of violent Northern abolitionist incursions. The Democratic Party fractured in April 1860 when Southern delegates walked out over the platform's failure to protect territorial slavery. Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas on a platform of popular sovereignty, and Douglas campaigned actively across the country. Southern Democrats nominated John Breckinridge on a platform demanding absolute federal protection for slave property. Seeking to prevent disunion, the Constitutional Union Party nominated John Bell, pledging to defend only the Constitution and the Union. Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln on a platform opposing the expansion of slavery while promising not to interfere with it locally. On Election Day, voter turnout reached 81.2%, though Lincoln's name was omitted from ballots in most Southern states. Lincoln won a decisive electoral college victory by carrying the North, serving as the immediate catalyst for Southern secession. South Carolina seceded on December 20, 1860, followed by 6 more Deep South states who blamed Northern hostility. In February 1861, the seceded states formed the Confederate States of America, selecting Jefferson Davis as president. Major Anderson consolidated his forces at the island fortress of Fort Sumter, a move that angered Southern secessionists. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces bombarded and captured the Union garrison at Fort Sumter. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, prompting 4 Upper South states to secede and join the Confederacy. General Winfield Scott proposed the Anaconda Plan to blockade the southern coast and seize the Mississippi River. General George McClellan trained the massive Army of the Potomac, but was criticized for his cautious battlefield strategy. The Union suffered a shocking defeat at the First Battle of Bull Run, proving the South would fight a prolonged struggle. General Thomas Jackson earned his legendary nickname Stonewall for holding his ground and turning the tide of the battle. The Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 resulted in immense casualties, but Grant successfully repulsed the Confederate attack. In April 1862, Flag Officer David Farragut captured New Orleans, giving the Union control of the South's largest port. The Battle of Hampton Roads in March 1862 marked the first clash of ironclads, preserving the Union naval blockade. General Benjamin Butler declared escaped slaves contraband of war, establishing a legal pathway to freedom for Southern refugees. General David Hunter declared all slaves in his department free, but Lincoln revoked the order to protect border state loyalty. Congress passed the Second Confiscation and Militia Acts in July 1862, freeing escaped slaves and authorizing their enlistment. The Battle of Antietam on September 17, 1862, was the deadliest single day, giving Lincoln the victory needed to issue his proclamation. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln warned that all slaves in rebel territory would be declared free if the rebellion did not cease. Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, legally freeing 3 million slaves in rebellious states. Although it exempted loyal border states, the proclamation permanently transformed the war into a crusade for human freedom. The proclamation authorized black military recruitment, prompting Frederick Douglass to enlist men for the newly formed U.S. Colored Troops, USCT. In late 1863, the War Department authorized black recruitment in the loyal border states to bolster the Union Army. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry earned national acclaim for its extraordinary valor during the assault on Fort Wagner in July 1863. Over 180,000 black soldiers served in the Union military, providing a critical manpower advantage despite lower pay and discrimination. Opposition to the federal draft sparked the violent New York City draft riots in July 1863, targeting black residents. In March 1864, Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant to command all Union armies, initiating a relentless, coordinated campaign. USCT soldiers faced unique dangers, including the April 1864 Fort Pillow massacre, where Confederate forces executed captured black troops. Grant launched his Bloody Overland campaign in May 1864, waging a war of attrition that pinned Lee's forces in Petersburg. General Sherman captured Atlanta in September 1864, boosting Northern morale and securing Lincoln's presidential re-election. In November 1864, Sherman began his March to the Sea, destroying Georgia's military resources to break Southern civilian resolve. The conflict effectively ended on April 9, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army at Appomattox Courthouse. 5 days later, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, elevating Vice President Andrew Johnson to the presidency. Johnson pursued a lenient Reconstruction plan, granting amnesty to former Confederates and restoring their property. Re-established Southern legislatures passed discriminatory black codes to restrict the political and economic freedom of the newly emancipated. Outraged by the codes, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1867 over Johnson's veto, marking a historic legislative rift. Republicans passed the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, placing the South under martial law and requiring black enfranchisement. In 1868, the House impeached President Johnson. Although the Senate fell 1 vote short of conviction, his political power was shattered. Ratified in July 1868, the 14th Amendment guaranteed birthright citizenship, equal protection, and due process, overturning the Dred Scott ruling. Ulysses S. Grant won the election of 1868, secured by newly enfranchised black Southern voters who cast 700,000 crucial ballots. Ratified in 1870, the 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote based on race, establishing the foundation for a multiracial democracy. Black voters formed the backbone of the Southern Republican coalition, electing black representatives and establishing the South's first public schools. Southern progress faced violent backlash from white supremacist terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, who used murder to suppress black voters. In the slaughterhouse cases of 1873, the Supreme Court narrowed the 14th Amendment by ruling it only protected limited national citizenship rights. In United States v. Cruikshank, 1876, the court reversed convictions of white massacres, ruling the 14th Amendment did not limit private discrimination. Southern Democrats launched the violent Mississippi Plan in 1875, using paramilitary force to overthrow Republican governments and restore white supremacy. The disputed presidential election of 1876 between Hayes and Tilden created a severe constitutional crisis over contested Southern electoral votes. To resolve the deadlock, the party struck the Compromise of 1877, awarding Hayes the presidency in exchange for withdrawing federal troops. In April 1877, Hayes withdrew federal troops, causing Southern Republican governments to collapse and Redeemers to dismantle civil rights. The end of Reconstruction brought about nearly a century of Jim Crow segregation, prompting thousands of exoduster families to flee to Kansas.